So we've now moved on to the detailed slide in terms of the seed funding options. On the previous slide we outlined these. They were grants, university seed funds, friends and family, angel investors and sidecar funds. We're now going to explore these in a little bit more detail. Grant funding I like a lot. Usually, although not always, these are not repayable. So they're grants that are provided to you. You have to apply, you have to go through a merit criteria. You usually it's a competitive grant program. But as long as you have been willing to do the legwork, you've got a good idea, you've got a credible submission, and you've met all of their criteria, it's highly likely that you would get those grants. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the type of grants that are available here in the ACT.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I ask a question about what constitutes matched funding? With a lot of the grants they ask for matched funding, what do they mean by that?
Good question. So the question was around matched funding. So matched funding means that if you apply for $10,000, the agency that is providing the grant to you expects you to match it with $10,000. Sometimes that $10,000 has to be cash that you have put into the business. Sometimes they will accept revenue as a co-contribution, but they do expect a like-for-like matching of the grant. I like this because it actually shows commitment. It demands commitment from the entrepreneur. They have to match the money. But I also like the fact that the grant actually extends the runway. So instead of having $10,000 to deploy in terms of the developer that we were talking about before, with the grant you've got $20,000. And as we said earlier, it's likely that that grant is non-repayable. I hope that answered your question. So we will talk about them. The con, if you like, is that it is time consuming. You have to follow the process for the agency who are issuing the grant. Usually they have time frames for submission, so it may be monthly, it may be quarterly. You have to understand what their time frame is. You need to follow their guidelines, and you need to make sure that your application matches all of their criteria. So it is time consuming, and often it may take many months for you to go through the process before you actually get the money. Some of the grants may not even be paid until the very end of your project, as we'll see later. The second type of funding is university seed funds. Here in the ACT we have the Australian National University. They have a seed fund called the Discovery Translation Fund, and I'll be talking about that in a bit more detail. The benefits of these types of grants is that the quantum of money you can apply for is larger. Again, usually they're not repayable, but again, you have to compete with other entrepreneurs in the market. Usually there's a larger number of applicants than the agency can support, so you may go through the process of putting in an application and you may be unsuccessful. So you have to think of the cost and time consequence of that if you're not successful. I would argue that going through the process and not being successful is still a good outcome, because what it's made you do is it's made you really think about your business, it's made you define your market, it's made you think about what your path to market is, and it's helped you to really strengthen your go-to-market hypothesis. And so I'm a great believer in having entrepreneurs go through this process because it strengthens your idea, just the rigor that you go through. We talked about friends and family. It is easy to secure, but there may be some long-term consequences if you lose the money. My recommendation just on friends and family, pay it back as soon as you can, so that you don't have that emotional liability going forward. So if there's any investment dollars that you should pay back quickly, then it's the friends and family ones. You want to get back to just having a normal relationship rather than one muddied by financial obligation. We then move on to angel investors, and I'll talk more about them during the slide presentation. They're typically high net worth individuals who like investing in the high risk early stage space, and they put money into your company and they typically buy equity in your company, so they buy shares in your company. But we will talk about that more in more detail. The challenge with that is that there is what I call a governance overhead. So as soon as you have external shareholders as part of your business, you have to treat them as such. You have to keep them informed. You obviously have to comply with all government regulations. You should comply with all government regulations anyway, but in particular when you have other shareholders involved, you have to ensure that you are following good governance, and that everything in terms of insurances, tax, etc., all of that is paid on time, because obviously your shareholders expect you to do that. And finally, sidecar funds. So I'll talk about sidecar funds when we get to the slide on angel investing. Has anyone got any questions at this stage? Okay. So let's drill down a little bit with EventMate. And if you remember, Angela has been thinking about this for 3 months, and in June 2012, she decided that the idea had merit and the idea was worth pursuing. So what she's been looking around for is, are there any grants or funding options that she could explore here in the ACT to help her with crystallizing her thinking, or providing a proof of technology, or accelerate the innovation. We're fortunate that we have what's called an ICON grant here. It's called the Innovation Connect, and these grants are between $5,000 and $50,000. You have to go through a formal process. Grants are awarded on a dollar for dollar basis, so you do have to match the grant that you're applying for. And it is based on milestones. So those milestones are pre-agreed by you and the funding agency, and the payment of that grant is dependent on you achieving the milestones at the end of the agreed period. So this is a wonderful way of extending your capital and achieving very relevant milestones. In the case of Angela, she wants to prove her technology. Let's say she's going to apply for $30,000, so she would have to find $30,000 to do that. Or if she believes the total amount she needs is $30,000, she could apply for $15,000 and match it with $15,000. Regardless, this is a great incentive program to help her move from an idea to a proof of the technology. And that is the ICON grant.